Okay, well, welcome to the living history of the movement of God in our generation.
Thank you.
It's exciting to have you guys. We're going to hear some exciting stuff from John Louis and from Harlem Salim. And John, if you would please introduce yourself, spell your name to the camera, and give your role.
My name is John Louis. Louis is spelled Louis. I'm currently leading the church in Sydney, Australia. And my wife and I, we're responsible for the Australasia part of the Commonwealth sector. And that comprises of 20 churches and 7 different nations. We have right now over 4,000 disciples in the entire region. And the church in Sydney is slightly over 500 in strength at this point. And what else? When things are going great.
Come on.
All right, and Harlem, tell this camera.
My name is Harlem Salim. I'm not a Muslim, but my name sounds like a Muslim name. And I have an awesome, beautiful wife with 2 kids, 2 daughters, and they're doing great right now. And I'm leading the church in Jakarta, and also I'm leading the whole Indonesia at this point in time since the Louis left the country. Basically, right now in the church in Jakarta, we have about 1,130 disciples, and the whole Indonesia right now we have 1,700 disciples throughout 6 churches in the whole Indonesia. So,
And
Did you spell your name?
Yeah,
right, Harlem Salim.
spell.
Oh, I want to spell it.
Yeah.
Harliem, and Salim Salim.
Great.
And then bear in mind also, Indonesia is the world's largest
Right.
Muslim nation.
And it has 17,000 islands.
17,000 different islands. It's the world's largest archipelago. There are more active volcanoes alive in Indonesia than anywhere else in the world. And
What's the population?
population is right
200 million.
now 200 million. And she is right now the fourth largest nation
Right.
in the world, population-wise. After China, India,
Russia.
United States, and then
Yeah,
Indonesia.
Right.
So, got a lot of work to do. It's a lifetime of work there.
Right.
You know. So,
And the U.S. is 250 million. I
yeah.
think,
So,
right?
if you can imagine, yeah, that's right.
It's almost as big as US.
Yeah.
Right.
So, 4/5 of the United States, you know, is if you bring all that with 300 different ethnic tribes, is what Indonesia is made up of.
Right.
So.
Well, John, why don't you tell Harlem about your conversion and your family's conversions, your marriage, and fill us in on your story.
Okay, I was I was an engineering student in London, and during my first year, an English brother invited me to church, and I was a Catholic at that time, a fairly devout Catholic, and I hated the invitation right when it was given to me, and I went to the Bible talk that night with the sole intention to teach them about Catholicism. And my whole life changed that night. That was in 1983. And during my first year as an engineering student, I then obviously continued to study the Bible. And about a month later, I remember distinctly, after my first year exams, I studied the Bible and I got baptized. And the church in London at that time was about 50 in strength. And I think I was the 51st baptism. There had 52 baptisms that year. And I was the 51st baptism in 1983. Then, after my baptism, I continued to finish my degree. So during that 2-year period, I became a leader and led several Bible talks and held different positions of responsibility. And my sole desire, right from then, was to go back one day to Southeast Asia, where I'm from, and to be able to start a work there. And so in 1985, I graduated from my engineering. And the day I finished my exam, I remember when I wrote my exam and I knew I passed. But the day I finished my exam, I went in the ministry. And when I went into my dormitory, I packed all my things, and I was very, very fearful. And I thought this was going to be my first day in the ministry. And I had so much ambition prior to that as a non-Christian to just go back to Malaysia and to just be an engineer, take care of my family and so on. But I knew the need, and I was super fearful of going to ministry. I didn't know who was going to take care of my parents. I didn't know what to do, and I had no plans of, I didn't know how long I was going to be in London. And then one of my other fears was, who was I going to get married to? And I was just totally fearful. And at that time, I remember I got down on my knees after I packed everything. And I prayed to God. I said, God, you gotta help me go through this. Help me to do great. You know I want to go to the ministry because I want to start a work in Southeast Asia. I'm not doing this for anything else. Just help me to go through this time. And so that's what I did. And I remember right at the end, I prayed, God, please help me find a wife. Help me find a wife. And there was not another Asian sister in the London church at that time of my origin who was also going to go to ministry. And so I prayed. I said, God, you got to work this out. I know I need a good woman. That day, I met Karen McDonald, who later became my wife. And at the time when I met her, of course, I didn't know, this was how it was all going to work out. I remember just when I met her, I was very impressed with her. And it was during a Hope campaign that the London Church organized on a very, very large scale, 1985. And she then left back after the campaign, and we just wrote to each other. And of course, our feelings just developed from that. 6 months later, she came back to London, and she continued to be trained in the London Church. And then she became my girlfriend. And a year later, in 1987, we got married. 2 months after that, we led a team to Singapore, 1988. And then in 1988, March was when we began our first official service in Singapore. So that was exciting. It was a team of about 15 people. And that was the beginning of the starting of the work in the Southeast Asia regional conference, world sector. So with 15 people, and my wife and myself, we began the work. And God did incredible things. That very first year, over 150 people were baptized. And in the subsequent years that followed, the church grew and grew up to about 700 in membership. And then something interesting happened, and that was I had difficulty getting a visa to stay in Singapore as an evangelist. And so I had to take a job as an engineer. And praise God, I finished my degree because that came in handy. So I worked as an engineer full-time with a company, and I had to lead the church as well. The church was about 500 to 600 in strength. And so that was a very challenging time. But I remember just giving just my heart, and God still blessed us, and the church grew right to over 700 membership. And after that 1 year, I had further difficulties with my visa. So I took that to be a sign from God that the door was shut and that I'd have to go somewhere else. in the region to continue to advance the kingdom. And so the Spirit of God took my wife and I to Jakarta. And at that time, there was a lot of leadership problem with the church. The church was only 100 in strength. And the church was made largely of Chinese. And the brothers and sisters were incredibly fearful of reaching out to the locals because the segregation and the discrimination in that city was very, very high. But I remember again that fear set in, the lack of faith. But then through the encouragement of Douglas and Joyce, we devoted ourselves to the scriptures and to prayer and to really believing. And God started doing incredible things again. And from 100, the church then literally just multiplied every year. And right now there's a church of over 1,000 disciples in a matter of 6 years. So in 6 years, the church grew from 100 to over 1,000. And not to mention 6 other churches that was also sent out and that were planted. So God can do incredible things in the world's largest Muslim nation. And we had a lot of obstacles to overcome because the government would not allow any more new church to be registered. But through faith, God opened the door and we were able to overcome that. And in the meantime, also the work in Singapore began, another work in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, the country that I was raised in up to the age of 15. And the work there also grew. And all over Malaysia right now, we have over 500 disciples. So the whole Southeast Asia region right now has 3,000 disciples. And in less than 10 years. After that, Douglas and Joyce gave us the calling to go to Sydney, Australia, and to help out with the work there, which we did. And so in 1997, September 1997, we went over there. And so right now the work is doing great. We crossed over the 500 barrier mark. And all of Australia, we have right now about 1,000 disciples. So God is continuing to advance the kingdom there in a great way. The thing I love about being in Southeast Asia and now in Sydney is that my wife and I were able to lead churches in the third world, in Jakarta, Indonesia, in the second world in Singapore, and now first world in Australia. So that really was a good opportunity for me and my wife to be able to mature and be able to learn how to lead churches in all these different areas and parts of the world. And we continue to believe that God is going to do great things. My wife and I have 2 kids right now, Sonia, who's 5 years old, and David, who's 3. And then another thing that God did through us was God really opened the door to help my family become Christians. When I became a Christian in 1983 in London, I wrote a letter to my dad. My dad was totally disgusted with my decision. He even threatened to stop financial support. But God worked that out, and then He did it. Then I went back in 1985 to Malaysia, and when I saw my dad at the airport, the first thing that came out of my mouth, and I was so insensitive, but the first thing came out of my mouth was, "Dad, you got to get baptized." And so we had a 5-hour car journey from the airport to my home, and I did nothing but preach the word. And I went through all the studies, quoted all the scriptures. I mean, just did everything. And of course, it was highly sensitive, and I don't know how much of that went through my dad, but he didn't say much. But when we went home, we continued to study and study and study. And I knew then that my dad was opening up, and my mom as well. But it took some time. It took some time to really sow the seed. And then I had to leave and go back to London to be trained as an intern. When I came back and started the work in Singapore, I encouraged my mom and dad to move to the Singapore area and in order to be able to be with us and the whole family to be in the same church. They did that. And then we continued to study the Bible. And then my mom and my dad both were baptized. And along with that, I have 5 other brothers. I'm the second in the family of 6 children. And I also preached the word to them. I preached the word to first of all, my older brother who was with me in London. He wasn't too excited at first. I got baptized, but then 6 months later, he got baptized. He's now a disciple with the Johor Bahru Church in Malaysia, and he's a lawyer, along with his wife. Then my third brother, who was also an engineering student in Singapore. So I went and reached out to him and brought him to the Bible talk and studied with him, and then he got baptized. And then I reached out to my fourth brother, who was also an engineering student in Bangalore, India. That was the time when Mark and Nadine were leading the work there. And so I reached out to him, studied the Bible, and then he got baptized. And then I went to my fifth brother, Raphael, who was a law student. And he also studied the Bible and then got baptized. And then my youngest brother, who's now 17 years old, and I'm 34. And 3 years ago, he got baptized. So he's right now with me in Sydney. He's schooling. So the entire family, one by one, became disciples. And now, of the 6 children, 3 are in the ministry. I'm leading the work in Sydney. My brother Albert is one of the evangelists for the Kuala Lumpur Church of Christ. And my brother Raphael is the leader for the Johor Bahru Church in Malaysia. But he since then moved to Singapore. So God is working and is doing incredible things through them. I do believe that this is not the end. And even since then, my dad remained faithful. 3 years ago, he passed away faithfully as a disciple. He died from an asthma attack. But the funeral was awesome. It was obviously very sad to see him leave. And I was especially hurt to see the grief that my mom would have to go through to live right now, the entire life without him. But it was just so incredible to see how my mom just came out so victoriously. And she then decided a few months after the death of her husband to join in a mission team to India, to a place, to the very town that she grew up in the state of Kerala. And she was about 60 years old then. But she faithfully went to the mission team and was abundantly fruitful. The church is right now about 60 members in strength, and about 1/3 of the entire church is a result of her personal fruit and the people that those people brought to church. So God has done incredible things through that, and I believe it was God's will for my dad to leave. The time was appropriate, and it was also appropriate for my mom to go and be part of the evangelization of India. So I don't know what is going to happen in the next few years, but I know if we're faithful, God will continue to do things like that.
What town is it that your mom went to?
My mom went to the town in the state of Kerala that's called Trivandrum.
Is that the name of the church?
Yeah, the church is called the Trivandrum Church of Christ. It's in the state of Kerala, which is in the southernmost part of India.
Would you mind sharing some about the interracial marriage experience you've had? Just the reactions of your families and then other people, how they reacted to you?
When I when I decided to marry Karen, I remember calling my dad up, and my dad didn't say very much. He was silent from the phone, and I guess in his heart he was also fearful of what was going to come. My mom totally got upset. She cried for 3 days and didn't eat. Was totally upset, and she was actually very fearful at that time what the relatives would think. And at that point, she hasn't become. She wasn't a disciple yet. But then when Karen came over, and we started to spend time, we totally won our parents over, and Karen's hospitality and warmth and love just totally melted their hearts. And I have not experienced anything major in our marriage, any major problems in our marriage because of cultural differences. I think the biggest problems has always been when I was not spiritual. So I believe that if you're spiritual, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who you marry. If you both love God and devoted to the kingdom, God will work and will be able to overcome all the problems. And on Karen's side, they also had a very similar reaction. Karen's father, and especially, was totally against her marrying me and persecuted her and gave her a very, very difficult time. Praise God, she took a stand, and it all worked out until today. Today, they love us. They love our family. They're very, very amazed at the way the kids have been brought up, and they're not disciples yet, but I believe in due time God will be able to work things out as well. So I love Karen. It's awesome. I think one of the benefits of actually being married to someone of a different race is that we're able to go to different churches and use one another's strength. When we were in the third world, I knew more how the Asians were thinking. And I was able to then orchestrate our thoughts and to be able to just teach Karen how to be involved in the Asian ministries. Then we moved to the first world. And the church I lead right now is predominantly white people. And so now the reverse is taking place, where she's now able to tell me how do these people think and some of the challenges we need to overcome. And so it's been great. I think if we really allow one another's strength to come out, God could really use it in a great way. And so it was good because I've learned to be able to really listen to my wife and really, really take to heart what she has to say. And that's been fantastic. So many of my major decisions changed as a result of talking to her. And I know that as a team, we can do great things if we simply submit to each other, listen to each other, and still take the lead as a husband, but to be able to do it in a way that will bring out his strength.
You want to explain some about Karen's background, where she's from, and what culture she came from, and then the difference in your background and her background.
Karen is a citizen of the United States. She's totally an American. She's from the state of Texas, where I hear everything is bigger and better. But she loves it there. She's from a very, very wealthy family, and the thing that really attracted me to her was just her devotion to God. And I had no idea that actually she was from a wealthy family. Right at the beginning, I had no idea. Not that I cared if I knew, but after we got married was when I realized how wealthy her whole family really, really was. And my respect for her just really, really just went up, because it was just incredible what she left and what she gave up. She would spend $1,000 a month just on clothes when she was not a disciple. That's the kind of lifestyle she led. She had so many shoes. We can't even count how many pairs of shoes she had. But that's the kind of life she led. She wore only designer's clothes. I mean, she knew all the brand. And when it's so funny because whenever we talk to somebody, she could tell what kind of clothes they wear. And from that, she's able to give me an insight into maybe what kind of characters they are. And but that's the kind of person she was. But to think she's changed incredibly from having that worldly mindset that was totally anchored deeply into the world to such a spiritual woman who's now able to go anywhere, do anything, give up everything. It's just truly remarkable. So in Texas, she's from a little town called Rawls, Texas. That's the next biggest city there is Lubbock, and that's the Bible Belt, I guess, the Mecca of Christianity in the United States. We go there every 3 years just to visit a family and to spend Christmas there. And so she's from that part of the world, whereas I'm from a little town in Malaysia called Taiping. Taiping. And to think that God would bring a woman from Rawls, Texas, and a guy from Taiping, Malaysia, and unite them, it's pretty remarkable. And I believe it's a marriage arranged by God in heaven. So I'm grateful. And the thing I've learned from it all is that if you just put God first, He'll give you everything you need. You don't have to worry about finding a wife or a husband. Just love the kingdom. But pray and ask God what you want and look for it. But put the kingdom first. That's what I was able to learn through all that. And so it's great.
Amen. That's pretty awesome, man. Incredible. Great stuff. Well, Harlem, why don't you tell us about your conversion and marriage and your family and so on.
So I never even thought of even go to the States. Basically, I finished my undergrad and I thought, that's it. I'm going to go and live in Indonesia and just work there.
I'm sorry, I should have included you in. Maybe just start about where you grew up and then going to the States to study. And then what your thoughts are.
And talk about how you got rejected of the green card. That'd be hilarious.
Yeah.
Because he had the American dream.
Uh-huh.
So talk from okay. So I was born in a small city in Indonesia. Actually, that's the third largest city in Indonesia, which is Medan. It's called Medan, Medan. And then I went to the university in Bandung. This is in Java Island. And after I finished my undergrad, basically I just feel like I'm gonna go and just work and just be a businessman and just be rich. And then that's when I start knowing Vanya. And at that time, actually I just broke off, and I was pretty brokenhearted. I was feeling bad. And that's when I start to know Vanya, because our family had a long relationship. I mean, my parents and Vanya's parents know each other pretty well. And that's when they started introducing us. And that's when I start liking Vanya. And then Vanya has to go to the States to study. So I never even thought of going to the States to study. And then finally I decided, well, I'm not gonna lose my second one, and I just ready to go to the States. So I followed Vanya a year after that, going to study in Oregon. And it's funny because when I was about to finish my study MBA program in the States, there's one friend of mine, Indonesian friend, came over like 12 o'clock midnight, came and he said, Harlem, you want to apply for a green card? I said, no, I want to go back. I'm ready to go back. And he said, no, just apply it. It's a lottery thing. They're going to have 40,000 people accepted from throughout the world. I said, what is the chance? It's every day they're gonna throw out 4 million applications every day. And what is the chance for me to be able to get a green card? And it's so amazing because 2 weeks later, I got the letter from Immigration Office of United States saying over there that I can have a green card, live and stay in the United States. So I just applied for Arthur Anderson and I got accepted. And then I flew over to Chicago and worked in Chicago for Arthur Anderson over there. And I was working for about a month, and then I felt spiritually dry because I came from a very religious background. I was born as a Buddhist, but then I became quote unquote Christian and very devoted to Charismatic Church. And then I remember one Sunday night, I was pretty dry spiritually. And I came back and I just cried on my knees, on my bed. And I said, God, I just need you. I just felt dry spiritually. I don't know, but please help me out. I remember next day on Monday, usually I get off work at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And that day, my manager kind of like tell me, oh, Harlem, just work overtime a bit for 2 hours. And it's so funny because I walked back to my apartment around 7 p.m. at night. And there's one Filipino guy come toward me and he said, are you Filipino? I said, no, I'm Indonesian. And he just started asking me to study the Bible. This is happening in Chicago. And I was kind of suspect a bit about him because I thought maybe he was from Mormon church or Jehovah's Witness. And then after that, next day we get together, we start studying the Bible. And finally I figure out that they are from Asian ministry. The ministry just started in Chicago. And I started studying the Bible. A week later, I got baptized. Once I got baptized, I called up Vanya back in Oregon because I tried to convert her from Buddhist background to a Christian in Methodist. And then I told her, Vanya, sorry, I converted you to a wrong church. You know, this is totally wrong. And I wanted to come over to Chicago and study the Bible. So finally, she decided to come to Chicago, study the Bible, and also got baptized over there. But to make the long story short, basically in that Asian ministry, they gave us a lot of dream to go back to our own country one day. And they have been telling me to go back to Indonesia, just go and be part of the church and maybe leading the church one day. So I had that dream, but I was so worldly that time, and Anderson Consulting basically gave a lot of opportunities for me to just have a dream in the States and just build my career in the States. And I felt like I have a green card. Probably this is God's plan. I mean, one in the world, I never got a green card. I wouldn't have a chance even to get a green card. And I thought maybe I'm going to stay in the States. And then what happened is one day, actually after Vanya was baptized a year later, we decided to get married. So Vanya basically went back to Indonesia after finishing school. And after that, we got married in Indonesia. But what happened is, on the way back, I couldn't bring Vanya. They didn't give Vanya a visa. It's so funny because as a green card holder, Vanya can easily go to the States and stay with me. But it's a funny situation. And then finally, I decided to go back to the States and still worked out that some way, somehow, Vanya can get back to the States. Anderson Consulting basically support Vanya. They gave a letter and everything so that Vanya would be able to go back to the States. And it didn't happen. It didn't work out. So we were separated for about 3 months, and I was pretty desperate at that time. And I got to tell Anderson, I said, I got to leave Chicago at that time. With something in my mind, maybe I go back to Indonesia, stay for a year or two until Vanya got a visa or green card, and then we go back to the States. So finally, I went back to the from the States, going back to Jakarta, and John was not leading a church at that time. And I was pretty weak, I was burdened because I had this American dream. And I felt like I have to make it back to the States. I don't like Jakarta, I hate people. I was born as Indonesian, but I was as worldly as I could be. And finally, John came back from Singapore to Jakarta, lead the church over there, and just loving Vanya and me personally, to just Karen, pour out all her heart. We try to give a lot of hard time to John so that they will give up on us. But basically, they just get in there. They invite us to come to their house. We study the Bible again. So until I think like October of 1994, when John gave us a dream to just go into full-time ministry. I remember that time Frankim came over to Jakarta and he looked at me and just challenged me, you need to go into ministry. So I got a big struggle actually with Vanya at that time. Pray about it, we talked a lot about it, and finally we decided to quit our job from Anderson Consulting and join the ministry. And I remember the very first day when I joined the ministry, I got a lot of challenge from my family because my mom was one of the top leader in Methodist Church in Indonesia, and she flipped out and she just hated it. And I think a week or 2 weeks after that, John offered me to go and stay with him in the same house. So finally I decided to move to John's house, and my mom just hated it. I mean, she came to John's house. She looked in the, at the place where we stay in John's house. She was like, because she was from a wealthy family, and she was like, she couldn't accept it at all. So she freaked out. The whole family just hated me, and they thought I was pretty weird. Want to give up everything, just join full-time ministry. And but I remember the encouragement from John and Karen and the love that make us being able to take a stand with our family. So we stayed with John for about 1 year. It's 24 hours discipling time for 1 year. And I remember I've never dreamed of even doing a big thing. I just felt like maybe I was very inspired by John's life. That's why I want to be like John. And Vanya is very inspired by Karen. She wants to be like Karen. And I think like 7 months after we become an intern, John trusts us with a sector to lead. And a year later, basically 1 year after we became an intern, we were appointed to be evangelist and ministry leader. And after that, I felt like God just blessing us so much, trust us so much. And with the help of John and Karen, I felt like we start having that dream in our heart. We start loving the people. We start loving Jakarta. We love being in the third world. And I remember, I think in May of 1996, so this is like almost 1.5 years becoming the intern, John told me that he got to leave for Sydney and lead the church in the whole Australia. And he told us that we are the couple that's supposed to lead Indonesia. That even scared me to death because I was like, I didn't have experience at all. I don't know what to do. But amen. I pray about it. I talk a lot to my wife about it, and finally we decided, okay, we just have to be there and take the lead. And God bless us since then. I feel like the church keep growing. God blessing us with the growth. And I remember the time when John left, the church has a membership of about 700, and right now, the 1.5 years later, we have a membership of about 1,130. And we feel like the way God works is so awesome. I never dreamed of leading the whole Indonesia or even being trusted to lead the whole Indonesia. With the experience of 1.5 years being an intern. I didn't know much, but I feel like when we give our heart, God will definitely bless. And I feel like one big lesson I learned is we can do so much for God because this kingdom is forcefully advancing. And I feel like a lot of people actually can lead in the movement of God when they're forced to. They will go up to their potential and just give the best to God.
Right.
And I never imagined how much God can really use us and really go and make disciples in our own country. So I feel great about it. I feel God has been blessing us. I feel like John and Ken have been helping us a lot. And amen. We're fired up about it.
Tell them about your conversion in the family.
We're going to talk about conversion of family.
Yeah.
And then, apart from that, the whole family basically just hated me and Vanya, especially Vanya's parent. She kind of like threatened us. Actually, they kind of threatened us. They said, no, I don't want any of the family members become a Christian. I remember through that persecution, Vanya's sister came to the church and started studying the Bible and was baptized. And Vanya's parent totally hate us, but she stayed faithful. And the amazing thing is, she was studying in one of the city about 3 hours away from Jakarta, which is called Bandung, Bandung. And we don't have any disciples in that city at all.
Mm-hmm.
And she's studying over there. And amazing thing is, every week she come down to Jakarta just to have fellowship with all the brothers and sisters in Jakarta church. And she was faithful. She was there, hanging there for about 6 months. And then she started converting one of her friends.
Mm-hmm.
And she converted several Christians, I think like 3 or 4 Christians, other Christians. And then when John decided to just send and starting the church over there in that city, just by her having the faith, we start the church that we never even think of sending, actually. And the church is doing great right now. They have about 25 or 30 disciples right now in Bandung church, just because of one person got converted and still stay faithful, even though there's no other brothers or sisters encouraging at that time, but just by depending on God daily in our life. And then we try to study the Bible with my sister, and she couldn't take it. She studied several times, and she basically critical toward the church. And then I thought maybe my family members would have a hard time to become a disciple. But I was very inspired by John's life, where his whole family became a disciple. Then Vanya and I decided to just pray and really ask God and beg God that God will do something, miracle happening in my family. Until like about a year ago, when my older sister had a marriage problem, had financial problems, and that's when she started opening up her heart. And she started studying the Bible. She was baptized. And then her husband also started studying the Bible, because he sees that his wife totally changed. Started studying the Bible. He also got baptized. And then my sister-in-law, my brother's wife, got inspired, because they see their life change. And she studied the Bible. She got baptized. And then finally, I decided beginning of this year in January, I got to move to my mom's house, so that my sister that already studied the Bible about 3 years ago can really being able to study the Bible again. We moved there. We hang in there with her, show our love to her, and she started studying the Bible in January, and then she was baptized like by the end of January. So my oldest brother, he never liked the church. He never even read the Bible. He hated Christianity. He started coming to church now. Every week he started coming to church, and just pray that one day he'll become a disciple. And I feel like my mom start opening up her heart even to become a disciple. So
That's great. Tell real quickly, like, explain who your family is, what your dad does, and Vanya's family also. Sort of get what kind of.
You can also mention how Vanya's dad offered you to take over the business. And, they're very rich.
Yeah.
Both families are very, very, very wealthy.
Go ahead, and after you do that, would you tell Peter's story?
Well, Vanya's parents, family, basically are very wealthy. And I remember a time he doesn't mind us to be a disciple, but he just doesn't want us to go full time because it's pretty degrading for them, for their kids had a master degree in business to go as a full timer. And because for a Chinese family, that's very, very degrading for them. And he felt like he was very humiliated by his friends, especially Vanya's dad. He just went crazy. And then I remember a time when he talked to both of us and he said, you know what, I had a business in one of the big islands in Indonesia and I'm going to give this business to you. And he has kind of like tempted us by buying us a house. It's a pretty big house in one of the most prestigious place in Jakarta. It's like Beverly Hills of Jakarta. And he bought us a house there, paying cash. And he said, well, you can stay in this house for 2 years. And you might think about it. I'll definitely give you this house to you guys if you guys decided not to go into full-time ministry. So they gave us deadline until December of 1997. And it's amazing because at December of 1997, we called them back and we told her dad that we don't want to stay in that house. We don't want the house and we just want to be in the ministry and just be fired up. So he basically kicked us out and we moved to a new place beginning of this year.
God has done incredible things in Jakarta. It's amazing to me who God will work through. When we went there, I was not an Indonesian, though I'm from Southeast Asia. But to go to Jakarta and to be able to lead the church, we had to work. I had to use my engineering degree again and to start a company. And I was so worried and bothered about how to be able to have a legitimate engineering work in order to be able to keep the company functioning. I'm well aware that a lot of the brothers and sisters, sometimes we start companies and there are not a lot of activities going on, and it's just a gateway to be able to get a visa. But I realized that was something we gotta avoid. We gotta avoid that. And so we prayed, and I did start an engineering company. And for the first 6 months, there were absolutely no work whatsoever. We tried to get it was a consulting company. We tried to get the businesses, but because we were so small, we were not awarded anything. And then one day, I decided to get some of the other talented brothers in the church to join in that company. And so we kept praying, kept being faithful. And then on a Sunday, a Singaporean guy walked in. And during fellowship, he recognized me. And he said, "Are you John? Is your wife Karen?" I said, "Yes." I didn't recognize him at that time. But it turned out that he was one of my neighbors when Karen and I lived in Singapore. And he is a self-made millionaire, although he was only 30 years old. Very, very well-to-do guy. And he said, I'm right now in Jakarta, and I'm looking for an engineering company to do all of my work. And because there's so much corruption in Indonesia, he was skeptical about giving the contract to a company that he didn't trust. And corruption is simply a way of life. But we decided we're going to do it the Bible way. We're going to do it God's way. And so he was impressed with our integrity, and so immediately he gave all of his contracts to our company. And God just blessed us. And ever since then, one thing led to another. We finished all the contracts, and then he gave us another one, and then he recommended us to another company. And soon we got all the contracts of a chain of supermarket in all of Jakarta. And so legitimate work began. And so God really blessed us. So I was able to stay in Jakarta as an engineer running the company. And till today, the company is doing great. And this was the company that also erected the orphanage that we have right now built as part of our Hope project in Jakarta. And God did incredible things. There's an individual by the name of Peter Smith. He is as American as you can get. He's extremely out of himself, very loud, just incredibly friendly. And I remember in a Boston World Mission seminar, after I spoke, he came up to me and told me that he wanted to be part of the Jakarta church. I told him, well, you got to get a job because you can't. There are no missionary visas that were issued. And just like I had to start an engineering company, he had to get a job. So he went to the Indonesian embassy here in America, in one of the cities, and applied. And immediately he got an offer to be an English teacher. Peter possesses a master's degree in English literature. And so he took the job, and he went to Indonesia and he worked, and he gave his heart. I remember when he arrived, he told me that he was afraid of not being able to do anything for God during his time in Indonesia. He was so skeptical that whether or not God was going to be able to use him. I encouraged him to remain faithful, which he did. And during that time, he did such an excellent job teaching English that his reputation started to grow. And in Indonesia, what is interesting is that all the high-powered ranking officials, they see the need in order to be able to rise up in their positions, to learn and to be able to communicate in English. And so all the high government officials do study English, and they have a personal English teacher that is sent to their office or to their home and to teach them English very, very regularly. And so one of the up-and-coming generals one of the up-and-coming generals in the Indonesian armed forces also had that desire. And so he wanted the best English teacher he could find in all of Jakarta. And Peter Smith was recommended. And so Peter Smith came and started to build a relationship with him. The general just built such a great relationship with Peter that after a year, he decided to adopt Peter as his son. And so he gave Peter a house, his house, where Peter lives right now with his wife. And they built an incredible relationship. And Peter then continued on with that relationship. And the general's command of English improved drastically under Peter's supervision. And when he first began teaching the general was not able to give a speech in English, I believe. But right now he's able to talk freely. I even met the general myself at Peter's wedding, where he acted as Peter's father, because Peter's parents were not able to fly down from the United States. So the general came with his wife and represented Peter's parents. And it was such an incredible wedding to see that a high-ranking general would come in and offer his service that way. And he publicly said that Peter was his son, and he gave a watch to Peter that has his name engraved in it. And Peter used that whenever people tried to come and cause trouble, whenever people would come, whenever persecutors would come, all Peter would have to do is flash out his watch, which had the name of the general, and everyone would then leave him alone. And through this Denver, Colorado disciple, God was able to protect the Indonesian churches. And God did even more incredible things after that. They kept the relationship, and the general then started to get promoted Suharto, obviously the president of Indonesia, had a great faith in his leadership. And so he moved up, and from a brigadier general, he was then appointed the second in command of the armed forces for all of Indonesia. And then he moved up and became the first in command of the armed forces. And then in March of 1998, he was appointed Joint Chief of Staff for all of Indonesia, which means that right now he is the head of the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Police for all of Indonesia. And Peter is still his teacher. And they have such an incredible relationship till today. And Peter spends a lot of time with his daughter, taking her out to the movies. They just have an amazing family relationship. And the general has offered to give Peter a lot of businesses, but Peter has turned it all down just so that he'd be able to focus and give his heart to the kingdom of God. Peter and his wife are right now the hope coordinators for all of Indonesia right now. And so God is doing incredible things. And the persecution right now is getting very, very intense. With the persecution against the Chinese ethnic group in Indonesia is getting very intense. And I know that that will spill into the church and has already done that. But I believe God will use Peter and his connection to really, really help sort the situation out. So, in short, we have a very, very powerful, high-ranking officer right now who's in charge of all the armed forces, who is right now who has adopted Peter as his son. So, I believe that we're in good hands. I believe that the greatest hand that we're in is God. But God has moved in an incredible way. And I have faith that this general will also be nominated one day as president for all of Indonesia. In fact, many magazines have come out recently, and they've speculated that he will be the president for Indonesia one day. So please continue to pray for us that God will continue to open the door that no one can shut. God has also done incredible things in Singapore. The church began there in 1988 and has sent out works to Kuala Lumpur, to Jakarta, which in turn have sent churches to the entire region. And so God has done incredible things through that. From the work in Singapore that began with 15 people, we have right now about 3,000 disciples in 10 years. And so because of that explosive growth that the church in Singapore experienced, persecution also grew. And in 1992, there was a very, very prominent article in the newspaper that was circulated to the entire nation that labeled the Singapore church a cult in 2-inch bold print. And we decided, after talking to Doug and to the world sector leaders, that to use this as a test case and to take it to the courts. And so that was what we did. The first stage that we had to overcome was for the church in Singapore to have the right to sue the press holdings. Now, up to that point, in Singapore, no society or church has ever been given the status to sue the papers. In fact, up to that point, they were not allowed to, unlike a company. So the first hurdle we had to overcome was to change that law in Singapore. And so God worked it out where he led a lawyer, a very prominent lawyer in Singapore, to represent us. He took up the case, and for 6 years, we were battling to just change that particular law in Singapore. And God worked it out in an incredible way, because after 6 years of fighting we won. And now the law and the whole constitution in that aspect has been changed to where the church in Singapore is now given the right, or any church for that matter, or society is now given the right to sue. And so we then, after overcoming that hurdle, decided to then pursue and go after God's enemies who were persecuting the church. And so we decided to bring the case to a trial. And in July of 1997, the case went to trial at the Supreme Court level. It was almost a 30-day trial period. A 30-day trial, and we had our witnesses and also a friend to the International Churches of Christ that was brought by John Bringardner and Al Baird to come and represent us and to act as an expert witness for the church in Singapore. And so together with him and all of the witnesses in Singapore, we went and boldly gave our testimonies in the courts. And of course, many of the defendants, who were the people that we were suing, also brought their witnesses that were made up largely of followers. And also one of the leaders, one of the ex-leaders of the Singapore church, Daniel Eng. And during the entire 30-day trial, it got incredibly intense. And both sides were giving their evidences. And of course, I was sitting there hearing all the lies that were spoken from the stand about the church and the deceit and so on. But we faithfully prayed for God to do great things, for God to work through a miracle. And after the trial, the judge decided to reserve his judgment. And 3 months later, he came out with a judgment. And the judgment was that the church in Singapore, and ICC for that matter, is not a cult. That obviously brought great joy, and we've been enjoying that verdict ever since. However, the defendants were very, very upset by that and have decided to appeal against that decision. That appeal and hearing is about to take place in July of 1998. So please pray for us. The judge also allowed, because when we were suing, we sued several different parties. We sued 5 different parties for their different publications. The judge did allow 4 of them to get away with what they published, because the judge said that it was within the framework of press freedom. So although the judge said we were not a cult, he allowed them to get away with it because he felt like they had the freedom to publish whatever they felt whatever they felt. But on the major case against the newspaper that printed in bold print that we were a cult, the judge said that has gone too far, and awarded damages for our church. So at the same time, he pronounced that our church was not a cult. So even though on the smaller cases they won, the judge said in his judgment, although he doesn't agree with what was written, but we've got to allow people to express their feelings. But the great thing of it all, the main thing we wanted to fight was for the judge to say that we are not a cult. And on that issue, we won. So I really believe that God will bring even greater victory at the appeal. And I know this decision can then be enjoyed by almost every church all over the world. And disciples can really, really get a hold of that judgment and to be able to give an answer to the critics. That, the opportunity we had that one shot where we decided to take it to the court. Of course, there are other times where we could have in the United States or different parts of the world, but we decided to not be on the offense. But in Singapore, we decided as a test case to really be on the offense. And the one time when we decided to take that approach, before an impartial judge, he pronounced that we were not a cult. So, brothers and sisters, we got to be fired up that even before an impartial judge, he can see the integrity of our movement. Even if he decides otherwise, we still have a higher judge, the perfect judge, and that's Jesus, whom we are serving, and he knows our hearts.
Now, is it true that the judges are appointed by the government?
The judges were also appointed by the government, and the newspaper is owned by the government as well. And so it was just amazing to see how God still brought about that verdict, although it was very risky to take it to the high court level. But God will still bless you if you're bold. Obviously, this is not an excuse for us to fight back when we're criticized. But it was good to just go for this one time and see what would happen. And this is what we did. Now, we don't intend to sue every other article that comes out from now on. I have no intention to waste my time doing that. But I think it's good to do that one time and hold on to that victory until we die.
So this would be similar to Saul appealing to Caesar.
Oh, absolutely. This is totally. And when you read the book of Acts, Paul fought for his rights as a Roman citizen. Why did he do that? I mean, he knew as a Christian we'd all get persecuted. But why did he do that? And I believe that sometimes God will put certain things in your heart to open doors for God to work in different ways. And through that, look what Paul ended up doing. He ended up preaching the gospel in Rome. So I don't know what this is going to lead us to, but I know one thing: if we're faithful, it'll always be victorious. So it's been a fantastic victory for the church. The church is really, really fired up, and ever since we had the offensive approach, no one dared to write anything bad against the church. Although we believe persecution will still come in different forms, and we're not unaware of that. But it was just great to see that before an impartial judge, that even he could see the integrity of our movement. And he explicitly said in his judgment that the main reason why we are persecuted is because our beliefs and practices do not agree with the mainstream line denominational churches. And it wasn't because we were a dangerous group, but because our beliefs and practices were not coherent with what was taught in the Orthodox churches. And so that's why they're upset, because our practices are different, our convictions are different, and so they've labeled us a cult. So it's just incredible how even the judge was able to see through all this. And they brought all kinds of library of articles from the United States, virtually all articles that was ever written about the church was brought into the Singapore High Court. And books written by men that were marked in the kingdom were also brought and read. Chapters were read, sections were printed and given before the judge. Witnesses and followaways, they decided to also take a stand for them. And all this was before the judge. And but what did the judge say at the end? We're not a cult. And so we got to be fired up and be confident in what we're believing.
Okay, Harlem, if you could tell us about the racial tension in Indonesia and how that's affected you personally, but also how it's affected the church and how disciples are really overcoming that.
Well, Indonesia basically is a Muslim country, and it has so many tribes over there. What happened is there are some Chinese from Malaysia and from other part of the world, they come into Indonesia and kind of like mix with the people over there. And we have about 6 million Chinese in Indonesia, which is about 3% of the population. But since a long time ago, they already kind of like taking over about 60 or maybe 75% of the business in the whole Indonesia. So what happened is whenever there's economic crisis, Chinese was the one to blame. This also happened in 1965 when there was a big riots happening where they killed 500,000 Chinese at that time because they're accusing them of spreading communist in Indonesia. And not only that, I believe that's because they have that jealousy because they feel like the Chinese just take over all this kind of business. And it almost also got into my parents because I remember, I was not born at that time, but my parents told me that the native just came to their house and with this knife and everything, ready to kill them. And that's when my mom's maid protected them and telling them that they are part of her family. And she basically just told all of them to back off and not killing my parents. But I remember my mom telling me that a lot of her friends were killed. They put all of them, lined them up on a river, which is very famous in north of Sumatra. Line them up like thousands of people and just shoot them and kill them right away. 500,000 people. And since then, basically, Chinese society kind of afraid to the native. They kind of like very always try not to mingle around with the native. So what happened is since that time, there are like two groups, like one of native and then the other one is Chinese. I remember around 1966, 1967, the government didn't allow any Chinese school anymore because they used to have Chinese school over there, and they didn't allow any Chinese character even in Indonesia. Nobody speak Chinese, nothing. So basically, the government just banned it that they don't want communism to get in there. They don't want Chinese to really take over on a lot of things. So that created tension between the native and Chinese. I remember when I was a kid, when I grew up, I was like probably the only Chinese in the school, and wherever I go, people just teasing me, and I got very insecure at that time. Very insecure. I felt like I couldn't relate to them, so I was really into myself. I only picked certain friends, only a very few native that really want to mingle around with us. And that also happened to a lot of Chinese in Indonesia. And finally, all the Chinese just mingle around with the Chinese and native with native. And it also happened, it created, because this system has been going on for a long time. So basically people grown up with that system, with that idea, with that belief. And it's very hard to find a native and Chinese basically being a best friend. And we have that problem also for people that studying the Bible. We have people studying the Bible that really hate Chinese. We have a brother, his name is Donald, and he really hates Chinese. Every time he look at Chinese, he just want to beat them. He just doesn't want to mingle around with them. He feel like it's very disgusting, basically just to mingle around with Chinese. So he studied the Bible and he really repented. And since then, he mingled around with the brothers, Chinese brothers in the church, and he started have this kind of love towards the brothers, towards any kind of people from all kind of race, including Peter Smith, the American brother. And the way God worked it out is so awesome that God wants to show him that even one day he likes one of the sisters, Monica, and she is Chinese. And basically they start dating, they like each other, and they're married. They had a baby recently, and they're leading one of the church in Manado in a powerful way. So God definitely shows that racism, God just hate racism. Now, whenever we repented, everything is just goes by love. People will just go and love people, and no matter who you are, no matter what color you are, no matter what background you come from. I believe that love can really break the barrier that we have in Indonesia. Even one of the officials from the government came over. When we had a persecution last year, they sent a lot of officials to come and kind of investigate our church. And one of the officials that came from social department, he came to one of the service and I was very impressed. He came, he said, I've never seen one like this. I've been to a lot of religion meetings, but usually the native just mingle around with native. And the Chinese, they have their own church. They have Chinese church in Indonesia where all the Chinese meet together. But they said this church is totally different. It's very mixed. And we in the church, we have about 50-50 ratio of the Chinese and the native. So he was very impressed with it. And definitely that happened because we have the kingdom in Indonesia.
I love that mingle around. Isn't that a great term?
They don't, even, I forgot to tell it, even in the school, we are treated differently.
Really?
Differently, yeah.
Like what?
Like University of Indonesia, they only allow like 2% of the Chinese that can get into it. So it's very competitive for the Chinese. It's not based on the intelligence, but you got to fight for that 2%. The rest is for native.
What's the population split in the country?
97 native, 3% Chinese. I might say 1% either Indian or and then 96 basically native Indonesian.
Can you say that again? The population is?
Just say it again. The population is.
Okay. Well, the population is 200 million people, and 3% of them are Chinese, 1% are Indian, or Filipino, or from other race, but the rest, 96%, are basically native Indonesian.
What about in Jakarta? What's the population of Jakarta, and then what's the breakdown?
Maybe Chinese about 5%. This is my guess.
Yeah.
In Jakarta itself, we have 15 million people, and the Chinese basically is 5%, and the rest are native.
Great. That's awesome. Now, is Vanya of Chinese background?
Chinese background, right?
Great.
But they treated us differently. Definitely, maybe like in America between the white and the black.
Mm-hmm.
But that happened very intense.
Right.
There's certain city that you can't go. Chinese can't go. There's the one radical Muslim. You go there, they basically torture you.
Really?
So basically, Chinese are really into their own community. Yeah.
Wow.
They rather go school in the States or go to Singapore rather than going to the local university.
Yeah. Wow. Did you guys have any idea that was a racial problem?
No, I didn't.
You can go to every country and find out what the racial problem is. It's really interesting.
I don't have one here.
Yeah, it happened everywhere.
So you got 1 minute.
I got 1 minute left.
We don't
Anything else?
What else? Peter General's story is the most amazing.